Stand over.
Camp Constitution! All righty, okay, this is our first class, and I think it will be a little shorter than normal. It's called Overview of America, and this sort of sets the tone for the week. Mr. McManus is going to be talking about political spectrum and some other terms that are important. So if you're inclined to take notes, please do that. And a little background on Mr. McManus. I first met Mr. McManus, it was in 1988, he doesn't remember, and I was going to the old John Birch Society's headquarters in Belmont, Massachusetts as a young, enthusiastic member. Yeah, I used to be young, and I'm still enthusiastic, but not so young anymore. And they said to me, oh, you need to meet Mr. McManus. He's over at the building over here on whatever road that was, in the New American. I went into his office. He had a beautiful office. He had his, he was a Marine, so he had Marine flag and the U.S. flag. At that time, I held my daughter, my oldest daughter, who's now, help me out, Miss Shirtliff, she's 38, 37, and so she was a little toddler, and this fellow gives me a very stern look, and he said, some world we're leaving her, aren't we? And I said, that's what got me involved, because I want to leave her a better world. Mr. McManus has been on the cutting edge of the freedom movement since the 60s. He's authored numerous books, and we got a few here, and he'd be happy to put his autograph on the books here. Also, he's giving you a oral presentation of a video that he did, a DVD he did back in 2003 or 4, which has received millions of views on YouTube and other formats, and I don't know how many of these DVDs. I must have put out at least 10,000 in the last 20 years myself. We have about 20 of these left, so let's give him a nice warm hand.
Thank you very much. Somebody left glasses here. These yours? If you want to find your way back, you need your glasses. Okay, we're supposed to start off a talk with something that you try to make it funny, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I want to tell a story about the burglars that were in a home. They were going around ransacking the place, and they were filling up their bags with whatever they were stealing every time. And all of a sudden they heard a voice, and the voice said, "The Lord is with you." So one of the burglars looked at the other, and the other guy looked back and said, but nothing else happened. So they said, well, it's just a quirk of... something else happened. Forget it. Let's keep loading up the bags. We got to steal everything that we can't find here, right? And again, the voice said, "The Lord is with you." So one of the burglars got a flashlight. He started shining it around the room, and he sees a parrot cage and a parrot in the cage. He says, "Oh, we don't have anything to worry about. It was just a parrot." And then he lowered the flashlight, and down at the bottom of the cage, there's a Doberman pincher. And the parrot says, "Sick 'em, Lord." Oh, you're a good audience, right? I like it. Okay, I usually talk for an hour on the subject of republics versus democracies. Now, what I want to do at the beginning of this is I want everybody who likes to be lied to please stand up. Everybody who likes to be lied to. What are we doing wrong here?
Oh, you're doing everything fine. It's just to put the mic a little closer.
Okay.
Because we're videotaping that millions of people are going to watch it on.
Nobody stood up. Nobody likes to be lied to? All right, well, let me tell you about a big lie that a lot of people are saying, and it's being pushed on them every single day of the week, and that is that the United States is a democracy and always has been a democracy, right? That is a lie. Now, most of the people who spread that, they're not the creators of the lie. They're guilty for being stupid, but they're not the creators of the lie. Right? And that kind of thing goes on. We'll get into something else before I finish here today. Another big lie that's going around, okay? So now we've passed out a flyer for everybody to take a look at. And I was supposed to save one for myself so I know what I'm talking about, but I didn't do it. Oh, yes, I did. All right, so most of you would probably have a copy of this sheet of paper here. And on the back it has political systems at the top. All right? The first is rule by one. That's a monarchy or a dictatorship. Next is an oligarchy ruled by an elite. Then there's democracy, then republic, and then anarchy ruled by no one. Somebody's playing with the machine. Okay, we're doing all right. So let's talk about those very simply. And we'll say that monarchy or dictatorship ruled by one doesn't really exist. It's never one. Whoever's the one usually has lots of cabinet officials and flunkies to do the real work of the job. Right? A good example of that is Putin in Russia today. Putin is number one, right? But he's not alone. If he were alone, he'd be dead in 24 hours, right? So then we go to oligarchy, ruled by an elite, a few. That's the key, right? And there's plenty of that going on, including here in the United States of America. So shift down to the other end now, and you see anarchy, ruled by no one. There are people who work for anarchy so that when they break down an existing governmental system, they can put what they want in its place. And what they always want in its place is the oligarchy with them at the top, right? So now we're down to democracy versus republic. Most Americans have been told that we are a democracy. You can't listen to a newscast without somebody talking about it's terrible what somebody's doing to our democracy. Oh, we have to do this to preserve our democracy. Democracy, democracy. I want to throw up, right? My wife said, please don't throw up on the new rug we got. You know? But it's been going on now. What's the story on that? Well, let's be very brief, okay? There's a man named James Madison who was the 4th President of the United States. He's also known rightly as the father of the Constitution. Why? Why did they choose him among the people who went to that convention in Philadelphia? To name him the father of the Constitution. He took the notes during the meetings that were held in Philadelphia in 1787. And it was because he took the notes that he was able to speed the process along when they finally decided, okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to have? And so on. So he took the notes and he had an attitude about democracy. All right? When they had put together the Constitution of the United States, the gentlemen who were there came outside, and there was a woman from Philadelphia who grabbed Benjamin Franklin and said, "Sir, what have you given us?" And he said, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it. A republic, if you can keep it." Right? So they knew, all right? So what was James Madison's attitude? Well, what happened is that the Constitution that was presented to the states went back to the different states for ratification. And the requirement was to get 9 of the 13 states to say, we want this to be our governmental system. Right? Ratify it is what the term is. So in New York State, they recognized that a lot of the people there needed a little bit more education about what was in the Constitution. So Madison, Hamilton, and John Jay, who became the first secretary of something, I've forgotten now what it was, but anyhow, the 3 of them got together and they parceled out, okay, you write about this one, you write about this, and you write about that, and they put out a book of the essays it's called the Federalist Papers. Now, how many have seen the Federalist Papers? How many knew anything about them? Okay, if you want a course in political science, you read the Federalist Papers. That's a good place to begin. James Madison commented about democracy. Now, I've mentioned this to a couple of people over the years, people who say we live in a democracy and we should do this or we should do that. I said, wait a minute. I said, let me tell you what James Madison said about democracy. All right, it's right here on page 81 in my book of the Federalist Papers, right? Hence it is that democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. In other words, stay away from democracy. We're not a democracy. The John Birch Society that I served for many years has a slogan, and the slogan is, this is a republic, not a democracy. Let's keep it that way. All right, so go back to the map I have of the political systems. We said that monarchy or dictatorship doesn't really exist, and anarchy is very short-lived. So now we're down to discussing oligarchy. We already did. Democracy versus republic. What's the difference? Well, democracy comes from two Latin words, demos and kratian. Excuse me, Greek words, demos and kratian, democracy. And what it says is the people rule, right? And James Madison has already told us that that doesn't work. It doesn't work because the people can be swayed, and if the people aren't vigilant about knowing what they have, a republic and the worth of it, then they will allow the people to rule, and the people can rule, as James Madison said, like a mob. So then we go to republic, and that's from Latin, res publica, res thing, publica, public, the public thing, the law. The law, right? And what it is we get people to submit to a Republican form of government. And what is the Republican form of government? It's the Constitution of the United States. I brought my large copy here because it's got bigger print, and when you get to be my age, you need bigger print. So what does the Constitution of the United States do? It establishes the government of the United States. It tells us we have to have a House, we have to have a Senate, we have to have a president, and it limits them to what they can do and what they can't do, right? The Constitution of the United States is not a grant of power. It's mostly a rejection of power that might be wanted. Over and over again said you can't do this, you can't do that, and so on. So what do we see in the Constitution of the United States? Well, we see it says all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. How many of you have heard of executive orders taking on the force of law? Right? An executive order written by the president, puts his signature to it, and it becomes law. Is that the Constitution being honored? Of course not. So there's so much about the Constitution that we could talk about, but I'm not going to get into all of it. Most of the powers of the federal government are listed in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. All right? How many of you have a copy of the Constitution? You all got it? You got one in your bag when you registered. All right? That's this little one. This is for the younger people. They can read it. I can't. So what you've got there is clause after clause. Congress has the power to do this, has the power to do this, has the power to do that, right? All right. Does it say anything about the power to run the educational system in the United States? No. No. So where did the government get a Department of Education? They made it up. It's not in the Constitution, right? So there's an interesting feature of the Constitution, and that is the last item, or the next to last item. No, it is the last item, excuse me. In Article 1, Section 8, after saying that you have the power to do this, and you have the power to do that, and this, and this, you get up to the last part of Article 1, Section 8, and it says, Congress shall have power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper. I've had congressmen tell me that they can do anything they want because of the necessary and proper clause in the Constitution. But they left out the end of the sentence. The end of the sentence says, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. The foregoing powers in Articles 1 through 17. Right? It's not a blanket grant of power to do anything you want, but there are congressmen who believe that that's what they have. And so that's terrible. Now, one of the items that is mentioned here, it's in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5, says Congress shall have the power to coin money. And you will find heads of the Federal Reserve, you will find congressmen and senators saying, we can do what we're doing, which is making money available to everybody just willy-nilly, right? And they say the power is given to them to coin money. I said, it didn't say coin paper. It said coin money. Paper is not money. You see, the money we had at the time was gold or it was silver. And the power to coin money gave Congress the power to start a mint. And the people could take their gold and their silver to the mint and ask that it be put into coinage, shaped into coinage of a fixed size, weight, and purity. And when they started doing that, that's when America took off. We had good money, it was precious metal-backed money, and it was precious metal itself. And that's what the power was, to coin money. Now, I have a letter, I didn't bring it, but I have a letter from former head of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan. Where do you get the power to do what you're doing? Because they've already canceled the this gold backing and the silver backing of the currency. They've already canceled that. So Greenspan wrote and he said, we get power to do what we're doing, and that's printing money, right? Printing money just as much as they want, as much as they'd like, and so forth. And we'll print as much money as we want, and we get the power in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5, that says we have the power to coin money. But coining money is different from printing paper. Right? Try to remember that. Coining money is different than printing paper. So that's one feature of the Constitution, and I'll get back to that. I want to talk a little bit about something called inflation. Now, do they obey the Constitution? No, they don't. I think if you obeyed the Constitution of the United States, the federal government would be 20% its size and 20% its cost. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And we wouldn't be going around the world getting ourselves involved in a little war here, a little war there, and something else that we shouldn't be involved in, so on. But let's go toward the end of the Constitution. It's a very interesting Section 4 of Article 4, right? By the way, the Constitution of the United States is not a very big document, right? I encourage everybody to read the Constitution of the United States. This booklet has the Declaration of Independence at the beginning, first 4 pages, and then it has the Constitution, right? If the Constitution of the United States were fully enforced, the government would be 20% its size and 20% its cost. And wouldn't that be wonderful, all right? But Article 4, Section 4 has an interesting clause. It says, the United States shall guarantee to every state in the Union a Republican form of government. In other words, if you're going to have a state in the United States, there were 13 that started, and then there was 14, and then there was 15, and then so on and so on. We're now up to 50. The Constitution requires that those states have a republic as their form of government within the state. They were so insistent on that, right? Well, let's go back and read this again. The United States shall guarantee to every state in the Union a Republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion. Is the United States being invaded?
Yes.
By
Illegal immigrants.
illegal immigrants.
Yes.
Anybody want to guess how many? About 20 million.
Yeah.
All right? When Donald Trump was president, he started to take action to stop this, and he succeeded. Instead of 10 or 12,000 coming across every day, it got down to 3,000 or 4,000, and it was going down lower and lower. And he kept getting money to build the wall, and that's what should be done, right? So the Constitution of the United States is not being obeyed, and the Constitution of the United States is being distorted. And why is that allowed to happen? Because most people don't know anything about it, right? And I blame the schools. Now, the federal government now has a Department of Education. And they give money to the school systems in this state and that state and every other state and so on. And therefore, those states have to go along with what the federal government wants, or they'll cut off the subsidies, right? And that's how they get control of the educational system.
Yeah.
The federal government is not allowed to be involved in education of the American people. There's nothing in the Constitution that allows that. And there are so many other things like that that the federal government should never be in. So we have that. Now, at the end of the discussions for the Constitution, there were some people who said, well, we left out some things we should have put in. Well, what are you talking about? Well, we left out establishment of religion, prohibition of this, and no allowing for abridging freedom of the speech, and so on and so on. So they said, okay, tell everybody in all the 13 states that we're asking to ratify the Constitution, get it ratified, and as soon as it's ratified, we'll add to it a Bill of Rights. So the Bill of Rights came later. But the Bill of Rights should be considered just as much a part of the Constitution as anything, right? So what happened? Well, they proposed 10 amendments, right? The right to keep and bear arms. The right of people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable search and seizure, right? And what it says is, Congress shall not. Congress shall not. Congress shall not, shall not, shall not, shall not, all the way up to the marvelous 10th Amendment, which says if we forgot anything, you can't do that either. Right? That's essentially what it says. So what I'm urging you to do is to get yourself familiar with the Constitution of the United States. Right? It's not a democracy. It's a republic. Now, the U.S. Army used to train the troops in peacetime. After World War I, the Army had a training manual, and they had everybody in the military go through schooling in addition to training for the military subjects. And the Army training manual that they had in the 1920s was absolutely on target. It was correct in every event. It defined democracy and republic, and it did it capably. But that had to go. There are people who say, well, we've only had this problem of everybody being told we're a democracy. We've only had this problem for about 10 or 12 years, or maybe 20 years. Well, no, it goes back further than that. The enemies of our freedom were very busy over all of the years. And certainly they were busy In 1950, they came out with a book called The Soldier's Guide. I have a copy of this Soldier's Guide, and it defined democracy. It said, meaning of democracy. Because the United States is a democracy, the majority of our people decide how our government will be organized and run. Dead wrong. It's already been decided. It's the Constitution, and that's a republic. Right? When did this booklet come out? It came out in 1952. 1952. I was still in grade school. So now you know how old I am. All right, so we could go on and on about this, but please try to remember, this is a republic, not a democracy. Let's keep it that way. A republic, the rule of law. And the best kind of a republic, of course, is the one that says government can do this, but it can't do that. And the can't do that should outnumber the ones that they can do. And it does. That's the system we have in our country. Okay, now I asked at the beginning of the class how many like to be lied to, and nobody did. Nobody said they did. But how many of you would have answered somebody if they asked you, what kind of government does the United States have? All right, you don't have to answer this question, but just think to yourself. How many of you would have said democracy? Right? Watch the news programs at night. Right? ABC, CBS, CNN, NBC, they're all the same. Right? They all push democracy. And most of the commentators that are doing that, they don't know the difference. They're victims of a bad education that a lot of people get. You folks are very lucky to have Camp Constitution. In 1 week, you can undo some of the junk that's being thrown at you if you go to the public schools. Just some of it. Excuse me a second, I have to have a sip of water here. Okay, the other subject I wanted to talk about is called inflation. Inflation is, you're left thinking that inflation is rising prices, right? Anybody heard anything different about that? Right? You know, if you go to the supermarket this year, after having gone to it last year, you pay more for the same amount of goods, right? In 1945, I was old enough for my mother to give me a $10 bill and take the family wagon down to the supermarket, load up the wagon, and pay for the whole load of the wagon with a $10 bill. Today it costs $150. Right? Same kind of stuff. What happened? Well, the dollar's value has been eroded. And people will say, that's what inflation is. I said, well, who do you blame for inflation? Well, you blame the supermarket owner, or you blame the gasoline attendant, or you blame the landlord or somebody. No, 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 no. Who do you blame? Who should you blame? You should blame the people who are flooding the country with paper, unbacked currency.
Right.
Inflation is unbacked currency being flooded throughout the nation.
Yeah.
Now, how many people understand that? Not too many. Not too many. All right, so if you like being lied to, then take it. Take that as a good example. It costs me more to fill up the tank of gasoline in the automobile. It's terrible what inflation is doing to me. No, that's not right. That's the wrong way to think. The right way to think is that if the dollar bills still had gold backing and silver backing, then the price would stay down. When I was in college back in the 1950s, I had a clunker of an automobile, and I could pull into a gas station and ask for $1 worth of gas, and I got 5 gallons. 5 gallons of gas for $1, and the guy wiped the windshield. Right? What does that cost today? Well, I filled up my tank of gas on the way up here, and it cost me $38. You know? and I don't have a very big car, and I saw you folks are the same. So what's happened? The value of the dollar has been eroded. What can inflation do to a country? It can destroy a country, right? I have some quotes from some capable economists. Economist author Henry Hazlitt. He used to write for Newsweek magazine before Newsweek magazine folded, right? He said, inflation tears apart the whole fabric of stable economic relationships. Its inexcusable injustices drive men toward desperate measures. It leads men to demand totalitarian controls. It ends invariably in bitter dissolution and collapse. Can a country be destroyed through inflation?
Yes.
Absolutely. And it's going on all the time. President Biden decided to give away $6 trillion. Right? $6 trillion. Where did he get the money to back it up? They printed it, that's all. So what we should probably do is destroy all printing presses, I guess. I don't know. Right? There's a historian named William Shirer, Shirer. And he wrote a book called The Rise and Fall of Germany's Third Reich. The book came out in 1960. And he talked about the fact that Germany, after World War I, was required by the other countries to pay reparations for what they had done. So Germany had to raise a heck of a lot of money in order to be able to pay the reparations and get back into the family of nations, right? After they had lost the war. Well, they couldn't come up with enough real money, so what did they do? They printed money. And pretty soon, one German Reichsmark would convert to $1 at one point, and now it took 10 million Reichsmarks to convert to $1. Right? So Shirer said in the early 20s, the German people knew that a large bank account could not buy a scraggly bunch of carrots, or a half peck of potatoes, or a few ounces of sugar, or a pound of flour. They knew that as individuals, they were bankrupt. Such times were heaven sent for Adolf Hitler to rise to power. And that's what happened in Germany. Inflation destroyed everything, and Hitler came to power. And what did he do? Led us into World War II. Right? Are we about to see that happen again? Could be. I don't know. Economist named John Maynard Keynes, who became a socialist, but when he wrote this, he wasn't a socialist. He said, Vladimir Lenin, the guy who started the Soviet Union, is said to have declared that the best way to destroy the capitalist system was to debauch the currency. D-E-B-A-U-C-H, debauch. Destroy, that's what that means. The process engages, said John Maynard Keynes, all of the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and does it in a manner which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. Unfortunately, that's the case today. You can go to college and you can study economics for 4 years, and you won't come up with the little bit of sense that I've just given you, because they just don't teach it. You look in the newspaper, you hear on the radio, the TV, or whatever, ask a teacher, and so, well, what is inflation? He'll tell you it's rising prices. Well, if it's rising prices, then the bad guy is the head of the supermarket. The bad guy is the guy who puts the gasoline in your automobile, and so on. No. Inflation is an increase in the quantity of currency that has no backing. We had gold backing. President Franklin Roosevelt took us off the gold standard in 1935. We had silver backing. President Richard Nixon took us off the silver standard in 1971. And now we're on the paper standard. Right? Is there any limitation about the amount of currency that they can print? Doesn't seem so, does it? Right? So the power to coin money is in the Constitution. Coin money. And what did it mean? It meant that the people had the right, or the government had the right, to establish a mint. Establish a mint to take the people's precious metals, gold or silver, and smash it into coinage of a fixed size rate and purity. So there's a little bit about inflation. Now, I came across something recently that's pretty interesting. Here's an article that appeared in the Wall Street Journal on May 14, 1911. That's 20 years ago. And the author of the article lamented the fact that the dictionary had changed its definition of inflation. So you can't even go to a dictionary today and get a good definition of inflation. I wrote to a lot of the heads of news agencies and newspapers and magazines and so forth years ago. I had a little project of my own. Please give me a definition of inflation. Most of them didn't answer. But the editorial page editor of the New York Times wrote back, and his letter said simply, I guess if you don't know what inflation is, you don't have to worry about it. And he signed the letter. That's the kind of arrogance that goes on. Right? What is inflation? An increase of the quantity of currency that has no backing. Remember that? All right, everybody repeat it with me. Inflation is an increase in the amount of currency that has no backing. And of course, what happens is, if you increase the quantity of any substance, you will lower the value of all of that substance. I like to talk about a beach on an island in the South Pacific that nobody's ever been on. Right? All of a sudden, somebody discovered this new island. And they went to the island and they found out that what they thought were going to be sandy beaches, it wasn't sand, it was diamonds. Wow, it was diamonds. So they got a couple of buckets out of their boat and they filled the buckets with the diamonds. And they came back and they started acquiring property with the diamonds. And pretty soon the value of the diamonds went where? Down. Right? And pretty soon nobody would give one to his girlfriend and ask to marry me. Right? And that's the same with any substance whatsoever. You flood the market with anything and the price of everything will go down. Every one of that subject. And that's what's happening with our money. Is there authorization in the Constitution of the United States for the federal government to do that to our money system? No, not even close. All right? So, if you like being lied to, then you like people saying that we're a democracy. If you like even more people being lied to, then you'll accept that inflation is rising prices. No. One of our writers one time said, inflation is not rising prices, and wet streets do not cause rain. Same kind of logic, really. So I wrote a book about this. The book I wrote is, what was it, 1993. It's almost 20 years old, almost 30 years old. Financial terrorism. And it's got all this information about that in there. There are several copies of this on the book table. I understand that everybody's going to be given a chit. You get a chit to go and buy a book, well, buy that one. Or if you want, if some of you guys are thinking about being in the military, you might want to read Changing Commands. Changing Commands is a book I wrote, and it goes into the fact that the military has been taken over by the United Nations. Right? The United Nations is really the director of the military of the United States. I don't know if they have copies of the Federalist Papers, but you might want to look into that. So there we are. Inflation is an increase in the quantity of currency. This is a republic, not a democracy. Let's keep it that way. if you get that much out of the week here at camp, you've got a lot, right? So take it with you and then pay attention at the other classes as well. Thanks very much.
Hip, hip! Hip, hip! Hip, hip! All righty. Thank you.